Good morning, world. This is the Space Cowboy coming from the interplanetary good vibe zone. Welcome back for today's video. This is a fun idea that I've actually been thinking about for a little while now. You'll of course see the title, and to get back into the Battle Network stuff, because I always want to keep the Mega Man Battle Network content alive and as much as I can. I've actually had this idea floating in my head for a bit, just because I've been playing through the Star Force games recently, and one thing I really appreciate about the Star Force games is just the way they are able to present their stories, and it's something that I thought about with Battle Network, where at first I felt like, Battle Network kind of lacked in that aspect as far as storytelling. But the more I thought about it, I actually thought back to the first three games with the first trilogy, and I actually made this point before back, and I believe it was one of the first couple of BBS chats videos where I talk about how the first three games felt more like a trilogy, where you have like this, what I at least always refer to as the World 3 saga, and how you have, you get the introduction of Lin and all of the core characters, you get the introduction of World 3, and how, it feels as cohesive as that kind of game could have back then. As far as, you have your characters, you have this overwhelming force, and, in the following games, you actually do feel the repercussions of said things, and some of that stuff does lead into the other. And Star Force doesn't necessarily do that exactly. They kind of do. I know the first game has like a whole great story. The second game, not so much. Things kind of start to meander a little bit here and there in the second game, but then the third game kind of gets back to like a really good story. But the through line with those first with those three Star Force games is that they still carry the characterization and the growth from like all of the core characters in between these games, and it still leads to something towards the end with big plot points that we introduced in the first game that's do somewhat get paid off in the third game. So that's what I wanted to do with this little project that of course me and my buddy Cobra will be getting into, as far as essentially the second half rewrite of Battle Network. And I'll actually change it up to say more of a revision rather than a complete rewrite. We've been talking about some stuff, and at least how we narrowed it down and how we are going to go about it is that we are going to keep the core ideas and concepts of of these three games the same, but we are definitely going to be changing around some stuff to make things feel a lot more cohesive, make a lot more sense, maybe make the story feel more more exciting and more cooler to kind of like go through between each of these games and have things carry over and actually feel like they have some weight and that they matter. I know this is all kind of hearsay for a children's, air quotes, children's JRPG, but there's plenty of pieces of media, not just games out there, that are air quotes for children, or meant for children, or at least a younger audience, but still carry a bunch of big themes. Not to say that this is going to be like heavily dark or any aspect like that, but yeah, that's basically what we're doing. And of course, how we are also going to go about this, at least as far as the videos go, because I would also like for you to go to his channel as well, is that we are going to be doing this in parts. So this first one being on Battle Network 4, and then the next video will be on his channel for Battle Network 5, and then the next one, or I guess technically the last one, would be Battle Network 6 for me, and then maybe there'll be like a fourth thing we'll do to kind of like cap it all off or something like that. But that's pretty much how we're going to go about this as far as the videos are concerned. But before we do go ahead and get into the good juicy bits of just talking about the changes and the stories and stuff, Cobra, say what's up to the people.
What's going on, guys? Hope everything's going well. I hope this video finds you well, rather. And yeah, basically Space Cowboy sort of laid it out. We've been discussing over the past couple of weeks sort of a restructuring and kind of fleshing out of the major plot beats and character moments that are relatively few and far between in the latter half of the Battle Network saga, regrettably, right? And kind of trying to mold those ideas into something that is, like he was saying, more cohesive and kind of connects a little bit more as a through line from 4 to 5 to 6. So again, these aren't going to be like necessarily the deepest ideas ever, but I think we're both very happy with what we were able to kind of come up with in terms of these ideas. And some of these ideas do pull from anime storylines, maybe we're subconsciously pulling from some manga stuff as well. I know Space Cowboy is very familiar with that element of Battle Network more so than I am. But yeah, I think without further ado, Space Cowboy, if you want to kind of issue the first starting talking point, we can kind of, go from there.
Oh yeah, so yeah, let's just go ahead and say real quick that so firstly, Dr. Regal will definitely be more of a major figure than he was in Battle Network 4, because I think a lot of us can say that Dr. Regal kind of sucks in 4. He's really non-existent. Battle Network 4, again, I know a lot of us in the community have our words and our feelings about BN4. BN4 is pretty much like the black sheep of the series, funnily enough, even more so than the first game, it feels like sometimes. But yeah, we kind of know that the plot of Battle Network 4 is really non-existent. The joke that I always like to make is that Battle Network 4 is like, we introduce like the canon plot, but then we basically enter the filler arc, like in between an episode of an anime or something. And then like we get back to the plot, and it's like Dr. Regal goes from a character that gets introduced to, oh yeah, no, I was the mustache twirling villain all along. And it just wasn't there. So yeah, Dr. Regal will of course be the villain. He'll still kind of have like this role to him. Again, a lot of this stuff, I did kind of pick a lot of these ideas from the anime, because I do think the anime does a solid job of like twisting these ideas from the games and kind of, presenting them in a more interesting manner than the games had. So I definitely want to keep Dr. Regal as the villain. Like, Dr. Regal will essentially be like the villain, not just for this game, but also just, for this second half. Like, he will be the wily, the main guy of this second half. So Regal will definitely be more of the villain he should be in this game, and he will be the driving antagonist for this, last half of the stories.
For sure. And I think, like, in addition to that, keeping Shademan as a prominent figure, but making him even more prominent in addition to that, I think is another component to add. You can kind of think of Shademan as being like the secondary antagonist to Regal, which, again, functionally he kind of technically already was, but it's just a matter of those two kind of not really having the best presence. And Shademan is more present, like, in terms of screen time. But, when you fight him, it's kind of more of a less scripted thing of, oh, wait for the dark chips to spawn in. You don't really get a real proper fight with Shademan until the post-game. But in terms of narrative, right, Shademan is going to be working underneath Regal. But Shademan also has his own ulterior motives that he is working within, and is sort of, I guess, reluctantly working with Regal for the time being, maybe for his access to the dark chips that Regal has recently created.
Yeah, guys, if you guys never watched which, to be fair, we only have the first 2 seasons in English, but if you can find a way to watch stream, because that's where a lot of this stuff does come in. Actually, no, I'm trying to remember. I think it does come in with the second season, but stream does definitely it does incorporate a lot of stuff from stream as well, at least a little bit. So, but yeah, you do get to see like the relationship that for lack thereof, that Regal and Shademan do have in the anime, like this very tenuous, relationship. And it's a really cool dichotomy to see like these two villains bounce off each other, because we never really had that in the first 3 games. I guess the closest we might have gotten was Base and Wily, but not by much. So I definitely, yeah, that was another thing. Definitely making Shademan more prominent as well, because he has a cool character. He's a cool design. It's kind of funny that this again, very much like Regal, you have this character that gets introduced in this game, and he's very much irrelevant for like basically the whole game. And even when you do get to that post-game fight, like it has no relevance to the actual story at all. It's just, oh shit, we didn't give you a proper fight with Shademan, so here you go.
Right, for as prominent as he can be in the main story, I feel like he's almost sort of written like a jobber. Or like he's sort of treated like a jobber, even though he's like one of 2, main antagonist navis truly in Battle Network 4. Since most of the navis you're fighting otherwise are, tournament contestants and the like.
Something else that I definitely heavily wanted to put into this game is that we will be introducing Barrel and Colonel early. Instead of them coming in being 5, they will be introduced in this game, as I feel these are 2 major enough characters that should be a main, major, focal point for this whole second half, rather than coming in at 5. And just keeping that whole thing of like, 4 being like the game that it should have been. And funnily enough, I originally had the idea of kind of just cutting out the entire plot of being 4 entirely and kind of just replacing that with 5, but we're kind of, again, like I said, we were working things around. We didn't want to necessarily change too much towards like a complete rewrite, because then thinking about like completely new ideas from scratch would be a little head scratching. But at least introducing Barrow and Colonel now and having them still be like involved throughout the game, I think could be really good for this game's story, because they are cool characters. I mean, again, it's Colonel. It's one of the major characters of like Mega Man, at least as far as like X. I know I do believe Colonel is a thing in the original Mega Man. I think you can correct me if I'm wrong. But obviously Colonel being like a big face from at least Mega Man.EXE, and obviously some other stuff that will also be introduced early as we go along. Maybe not necessarily in this game, but obviously sowing the seeds for stuff to come. Like towards the end, or even throughout this into like the subsequent stuff.
Yeah, I think Colonel is specifically just pulling from X4 in terms of like the main timeline, I guess. I can't think of any reference to him in the classic game specifically, but there is another character. Well, I guess there's a couple of characters that would be referenced here that are from the classic timeline as well. I guess a side note, do you want to keep the base EXE stuff? We didn't really discuss it beforehand. I'm not really sure how much of that you want to keep.
Personally, I would like to, just because
Okay.
I mean, look, the way I went about it is, of course, I think Base should be referenced in the story, but he will not be directly involved. But I would still like him to play some kind of a role in the games later, and I would like to see him return at least like 1 or maybe 2 more times, because I really like Base, like having his rivalry with Mega Man. You get to see it a lot in the NT Warrior manga anyway. Just like this, just the respect that they have for each other, despite them like, I mean, they are kind of friends. Obviously, Base wouldn't really say it, and Mega Man kind of does, but like for the most part, like they do share like some kinship with each other through their rivalry, and I do like the whole. I do think there is something that could be drawn from the fact that Base got absorbed by Alpha, and maybe like Regal maybe like discovers something from that, and maybe I had this idea of like these other powerful sort of like independent navies that start cropping up, maybe as a result of Base kind of like through word of mouth being like this this big name throughout the internet, of course, and maybe like some other stronger like dark navies out there like Shade Man, or even like a Video Man or Burner Man might like know that name or something like that. And now that he's out the picture, maybe they can like, maybe it's our time to like come out and like be the big dogs, or like the strongest navies, and kind of like replace them or something like that. And I mean Base, I think Base is just too iconic of a character to put away. I know Cobra had the idea of where he said he was fine with him being a super boss, like a post-game thing, and I don't necessarily feel the opposite way myself. I don't know, like just my personal bias. I think his relevance in this universe is too iconic, especially if you are familiar with like seeing him more in like the anime and the MegaMan.EXE animes and the seasons in the NT Warrior manga. That's just me though. I don't know how you necessarily feel about the whole thing.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think my stance is that I think BN3's story probably it has its issues. It's not a perfect story or anything, but like I think that the send off for Base there and like his prominence there is kind of like I feel left satisfied with his role up to that point. The foreshadowing and kind of the involvement in like BN2's post game especially, and then leading into being a prominent role in BN3. He just has such a powerful presence there that I think sometimes if you try to bring characters back again and again, they kind of lose that sort of impact, or they can. But I like what you were saying.
That is true, because that happens very much in a lot of series out there.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, but I like what you said in terms of base more so being referenced. And I think if it's mostly references at the very least in BN4 and like if it's mostly references and he's kind of like viewed as like this sort of mythological figure of like, oh, I heard he died or something, like, I heard that base died, but then like some people don't believe it because he's actually that guy. It also begs the question of like what Serenade is actually doing, and what their kind of role is in all of this, and why they
That is
wouldn't turn
also
up.
true, because
Right?
I also mentioned that Serenade, even more, funnily enough, I feel even more so in this situation, because Serenade is a very unique character where it's like, why aren't we doing anything with Serenade? Like, at least maybe as like a guardian figure for like Mega Man in some degree. Like, maybe it's not like direct help, but like they offer some form of help for Lan and Mega Man, because they do they do like Mega Man and Lan, and they do, like, they want to see them succeed, and like they will
Maybe
help out, and like as little if they can, they will try to like maybe give him some kind of like guidance, or at least like some advice or of some sort.
I was gonna say maybe that's something that comes up more so like because if we're to consider the post game scenarios canon, which like they kind of are from like in terms of the game's canonicity, right? Like, I'm trying to think if there's an instance where it's like specifically contradicts itself. Maybe there's something, but the well, I guess I'm trying to think like when Base directly interacts with Mega Man in BN3, if they're like, oh, I remember you from, World 3 area of BN2. But then again, Base briefly shows up, or a copy of Base briefly shows up before it turns into Gospel, like the final boss of BN2. I don't want to get too into the weeds on this stuff, but I think like they just maybe Serenade just trusts that Lan and company can handle whatever threat is inbound in terms of BN4, and so doesn't need to show up. But maybe that's something that we can adjust and sort of add in as needed, maybe towards the end of the series in full, right?
Mhm.
But speaking of which, I guess the main threat is still going to remain Duo, which is kind of hurtling towards Earth in the form of a meteor of some kind, whether the meteor is Duo's body and then it's sort of a sentient program within that, or if Duo just is that program within the meteor, or whatever it is, right? Duo is this alien technological threat that is hurtling towards Earth, but Regal is attempting to kind of influence what happens with regards to this meteor containing Duo for reasons that we'll kind of dig into at the end of this sort of rewrite discussion of BN4. And it's something that wouldn't in theory be revealed to the player until kind of towards the end, when Regal actually sort of pulls the mask off, so to speak, and is like, actually I was manipulating things, blah 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 blah, right? But Regal in this case is, as far as the player and the characters are concerned, Regal is kind of offering to help as one of the smartest scientists in the world to try and stop this meteor threat, this quote unquote unknown meteor threat, even though he knows that it contains Duo or whatever. And he kind of pitches his Navi MegaMan.EXE as the solution to the meteor impact, which is not too unlike the actual plot of BN4. It's one of those things we kind of kept, but tried to sort of flesh out. And the means by which he prevents interference from other Navis is he sets up the tournament himself, or kind of sponsors it, or like even from the shadows, right? It's maybe it's not even necessarily known that Regal is the benefactor behind this tournament, but he kind of pitches it, or the tournament is pitched as kind of this means to find the strongest Navis and to kind of recruit them to try and save the world and stop Duo, while secretly being a means for Regal to kind of isolate and sort of weed out these strong contenders, in addition to distracting from his actual plan.
Yeah, and I could see him approaching Yuichiro about it, and like him and him and Yuichiro and I guess like all the other scientists at Scilab, and along with the officials, kind of like formulate this idea, and like maybe that's how things kind of get kick-started. I don't know if you want to, or do you think they go about it a different way?
Yeah, I think that can work. I mean, it works very much, obviously, in that sort of shonen anime sort of logic, where it's like, instead of just finding and recruiting these people, let's set up a tournament because that's something that happens. And I think it's a fun way to still keep things sort of light, in addition to keeping the major beats, or like just like the major like ideas around BN4's story, while again kind of just giving it a little bit more depth than what was present originally. But I like the idea of Regal kind of pitching this to Yuichiro and the other scientists at NASA, whatever it's called in this game, originally, and kind of like setting that up through them. I think works fine.
How do you want to go about Shadesman introduction as far as like how he gets things going?
I think it can be similar to the original game, where we were talking maybe about like, instead of Roll getting kidnapped by Shademan and MegaMan having to rescue her from the radio tower or whatever, instead it's something like Roll wants to participate in the tournament to kind of prove that she can fight, but then gets kind of lured in by Shademan into using a dark chip, and then you fight Roll there instead of fighting Shademan directly, but not really, and you can kind of get around that sort of jobber writing with Shademan by not actually having you fight him until it's time for a proper battle where he's actually a challenge and everything. That's kind of my thought. Like, Shademan can still be kind of like the opening arc that, like, before the tournament is even introduced, or well, maybe during like the prelims, or whatever, the qualifying rounds or something like that, whatever it is in the original game. That's kind of my thought.
And then as far as the dark chips, the idea I had, pretty much, again, another, like, directly pulling from the anime. I like how the dark chips functioned in the anime in terms of essentially being like almost drugs for net navies. Like, it gives them a really big power boost. They kind of get they get a kick and an addiction off the power. Of course, it also kind of draws from maybe like some dark desires, but it also does kind of twist their their perspectives and things a bit. Dark chips, like being a game function, kind of takes away HP, but in the anime, it actually does deteriorate the data from the Navi over time, the longer that they use it. So that that's actually like a big risk that I can see being like a thing that can elevate the story for this revision.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Do you want to continue on with the next couple of points? So like the next point here?
Yes. So again, the tournament. Yes, the tournament is going to proceed as planned. I also had to think, because because of the whole like dark chip thing, I think that's also I guess again it sucks, because I know the joke too about like, oh, Lan's friends always have nothing to do in these latter games. as unfortunate as it is, I do think this is at least a reasonable point for why, like, Roll and maybe Dex. I don't know if you want to throw in Dex and Gutsman in there, because I don't want like all of them to get involved. As far as like this whole like, oh, they just get taken out because of dark chips, but it's at least more reasonable to say like, obviously Roll has to be saved, or even maybe because maybe the dark chips could have a different effect on some of them, where it's like they don't just stay evil. Maybe they get that quick burst of power, and then like they just maybe collapse. Maybe like the dark chips might just have a different effect on some navies. Maybe that's my way of like getting around it a little bit too easily. I don't know how some people would feel about that, like, oh, that's just a cop out for then, like, because then why wouldn't said character could be affected the same way as like other the other character or whatnot. But I don't know if you'd want to go about that differently, or maybe
no,
I could, like, change it.
No, I kind of agree. I didn't really have the idea that like Roll would be necessarily out of commission after. I was just thinking like that's kind of a way to introduce Shademan. It gives Roll and Mail maybe even Roll has this motivation like aside from her operator, which leads into the dark chips sort of like corrupting and sort of wanting navies to be more independent and stuff like there's that kind of component, right? Sort of Maverick virus-esque. But what's it called? My thought is like you fight kind of Dark Roll as sort of the first Ark's boss or something like that. But then, maybe her like little mini arc during the actual tournaments is her like actually finding power without the use of dark chips, and then you fight her legit during the tournament in that case, right? And then you're still able to get Roll Soul and do busted shit with that and whatever. But that was kind of my thought, is like you fight, like you wouldn't do this with every single Navi necessarily, but I think implementing Shademan, like sort of dealing these dealing these dark chips rather, kind of like a drug to these Navis, right? As potentially being like a little X factor to the various tournament arcs, I think is like an interesting sort of addition, and just further implementation of just making the dark chips more plot relevant, because they're just not really. There's not a whole lot that is plot relevant in BN4 vanilla, because Christ, but like, what is there is still kind of, I guess, lacking. They do it like, when you fight Shademan, when you get the dark swords to like beat him, that's like the one instance. I think that it's like actually required to use dark chips, and that it's actually like directly really referenced in that way. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on that. But I guess in addition to having some of these Navis be corrupted by dark chips, I think that there could be, and you kind of pitched this idea based on some anime stuff, that some of the Navis present in BN4 vanilla could just be working with Shademan of their own volition, or maybe they are able to maintain control with dark chips, or something like that, where it's not like a loss of control or like an involuntary thing, being primarily Video Man and Burner Man.
Yeah, Video Man and Burner Man are like in anime. They are classified as dark Lloids or dark Navis, and they are working along with Shademan to essentially kind of fulfill that purpose of just kind of making everyone dark Lloids, and just like fulfilling the prophecy of the dark Lloids, or some weird crap like that. I can't exactly remember, because it has been a little bit since I watched some of that season, but yeah, I think still keeping the characters that they did get introduced in the game, while giving them a different purpose. So like Video Man and Burner Man could be like still other like minor antagonists, and unfortunately, I guess they're not Navis, but their operators just kind of get erased from the plot. Well, air quotes plot, because they didn't really do anything to begin with. And then maybe some other characters slash Navis that are also introduced in BN4, that they can still be themselves, and maybe they also get infected, or maybe something happens. Like for example, Rika, who is also I think as far as the anime is concerned, he is a pretty popular character. Like he's like, aside from Lan and Shad, he's like the third character that they look to is for like the as like who's like the third character we can throw in for like episodes for like for the operator and the net Navi, like who's like a like the third pick that could be seen as like, oh yeah, this is like a capable character, like a well-known, like, oh, he gets the job done, very very like strong Navi and character. And like Rika, who is an official, mind you, Rika is Sharo's official, like, or at least like the main like official, like he's the one that we see. So like and like they are cool enough characters, like obviously we should keep, and then maybe like a couple of the other ones. I guess like Windman can stay, but like Windman's not like Windman and his operator, but they don't gotta be like anything major. And I think you also pitched Coldman being involved with Shademan. I think that they still keep the operator for Coldman, and like I think I might have pitched this originally. I think it would be cool for the reason why Rika might be getting involved with the tournament is because he heard that like, you know, I forget the operator's name for Coldman, but like Coldman and his operator, who are like, you know, criminals or whatever for you know, like Sharo, and like they escaped here and they somehow found out about the tournament, maybe like High or something, and you know, Rika's getting involved to obviously like bring him to justice, and obviously Rika might even learn about like, you know, what could be going on, and he might, you know, have gotten word from Netopia, from the officials of Netopia, and then like he might also like decide to like help out, you know, with Lane and Shad.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think that makes sense in terms of getting Rika more involved. And speaking of characters who get the job done that'll be more involved, we did mention, you know, wanting to introduce Beryl and Colonel. And so the way that Beryl kind of gets introduced in this hypothetical sort of rewrite restructuring is that, you know, maybe Lan and Hub or Mega Man, you know, kind of get skeptical somewhat of the goings on with the tournament. Whatever the suspicions might be, it can kind of be whatever, right?
Yeah, like Lane and Shaw both pick up on like because at this point in these games, it's like, yeah, like Lane. By the way, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier. Lane should still be an official. He and Shaw, like their experiences working together, you know, and you know that, you know, they know each other so well. It's like they both are able to pick up, like, you know, because we did mention like the dark chips will also crop up throughout the tournament too. Even though we actually did mention that with like, you know, Roll, because we said that was like the prelims or something like that. So they start to notice more like, oh wait, no, it's not just male. Like, you know, we're starting to see like a couple of these contestants or whatever crop up, and you know, it's like these dark chips are popping up. Something's going on, and then like they both like meet Beryl, and like Beryl might like probably pass them some information, or like he like, kind of like tells them like, I know about some stuff, like maybe we can work together or something to like, you know, figure out what's going on. But obviously Beryl won't. Beryl has his own stuff that he's not telling them, like his own ulterior goals that I, you know, kind of want. So I pretty much want to keep from Battle Network 6. Obviously we're not going to find out about that now, but like, you know, Beryl and Colonel, like, you know, they're still like, you know, air quotes, good guys, but they very much have like their own way about going about things.
Yeah, their allegiance is kind of unknown. Well, like their allegiance is dependent on kind of what their goal is, right? And I think like in BN4, especially in this version of BN4 rather, they kind of play the role at the very least of a good guy, right? Not that they ever necessarily become bad, but it's more just like in terms of what side they're on with relative to Lan, right? Our protagonist in this case. So it's like, yeah, Beryl is able to like gain the trust of Lan and Shaw by, you know, claiming he's with some kind of foreign organization, which could still be true, but it's just a matter of like, you know, he's clearly twisting the truth and kind of like doing so to get what he's trying to get, whatever that might be at this point. And so Lan and Shaw continue to participate in the tournament, primarily to try and get to the bottom of things, but they also both secretly just kind of want to battle each other late on in the tournament, you know, because, you know, they're rivals and because, you know, it's very heavily shonen anime inspired and stuff like that. And I also think that's just kind of a fun thing to keep in mind.
Yeah,
we already kind of discussed...
Oh, sorry to cut you off. I was just going to say I could easily see them, you know, also using this as like not necessarily the excuse, but also I could easily see them thinking like, oh, this was definitely a way to like keep up our, you know, sharpening our net battling skills. You know,
certainly, and also to keep up appearances so that Regal maybe doesn't get suspicious if they were to like drop out spontaneously or something to investigate this, right? Like still playing their part. Right, still playing their part in order to also be closer to, you know, checking out what's going on backstage, or like, you know, maybe listening in on conversations that are happening in a back lot somewhere, or like, you know, whatever, right? Whatever it might be. And maybe Beryl has extra information for whatever reason. He's been keeping tabs on Regal, maybe, and he's able to give them information that they otherwise wouldn't be able to, like, you know, investigate as well without Beryl's intel, which leads them to trust him or something along those lines. We already kind of discussed this next point being like Shademan giving dark chips to various contestants. But I guess the justification for that is that, Regal is trying to test out these dark chips and kind of see what they can do. But Shademan sort of, yeah.
And I was going to say, like, he sends in, like, or I guess he instructs Shademan and, like, I guess, like, his cohorts to, like, infiltrate the tournament.
Right, so you that's kind of where Videoman and Burnerman can kind of come into play, and while still remaining tournament contestants, but also still being, secondary, tertiary antagonists. The dark chips can be sort of this thing that infects various characters. Again, it doesn't have to be every arc, but, maybe the major boss of each tournament is corrupted by dark chips for one reason or another. I know we talked about, like, in Protoman's arc in the actual game, Chad opts to use a dark chip to, like, gain the upper hand on some heel navies, I think it is, or, like, just some, evil navies of some kind. And we can kind of potentially keep that, and then, Lan has to stop a Protoman gone awry. And then you can kind of pitch it as, like, oh, well, post-game fight with Chad is, like, sort of, oh, we didn't get our proper fight during the main story, so, like, let's do this for real.
I actually wanted to do it like this, where, like, Lan and Shaw do get to have their, which, funnily enough, this actually happens in the first season, where not exactly, like, they actually do get to have their fight, but then, like, I think, like, MegaMan essentially gets sniped, gets taken out. But I do like, in this scenario, and again pulling from the anime, I like that. Again, not exactly how this goes, but Lan and Shaw do get to have their fight. It gets interrupted by Shademan, and they Shademan, Videoman, Burnerman, they all have to fight. Burnerman and Videoman, I guess, like, ambush MegaMan, and he's dealing with them while Shademan, or while Shaw's dealing with Shademan, and very similarly to the anime, where, like, Shademan gets pushed, or not Shademan, but rather Shad is getting pushed and cornered by Shademan. Like, he's a lot stronger than he may have anticipated, and, like, he kind of misjudged, like, who he's fighting, and Shad still maybe has to use the dark chip. Or, like, in the anime, how like, Lan sees this, and Lan maybe goes to use the dark chip to try to save Shad and Protoman, but then Shad, in seeing this, and again, at this point, because of how much he's grown with Lan, like, grown alongside with Lan, and them essentially becoming friends, like, Shad, like, just chooses to make his own call, like, yeah, I'm not gonna let you guys, like, do this, and, like, he still ends up using, like, the dark chip himself anyway, and you get, like, Dark Protoman or whatever.
Yeah, I like that idea. I do like the idea of Lan abstaining from using dark chips, at least in the main story, and kind of saving that for BN5, where obviously, Dark MegaMan is, like, a boss for one of the arcs and stuff, and we'll get into that in the next video, obviously. But yeah, I think that can work. Like maybe they do have their proper tournament fight, and then, like was mentioned earlier, where Regal is trying to weed out the strongest contestants, maybe these two are, maybe MegaMan and Protoman, fittingly, are the final two, in the tournament. And so then, yeah, Shademan and co are then sent in to delete them and get them out of the picture, sort of deal. But that doesn't end up working, dark chips or otherwise, right? Like, they end up stopping them. And then maybe that can be sort of the end of Shademan for this game, leading to obviously going to, like, Lan, jacking into the meteor with MegaMan, fighting Laserman, and kind of leading sort of towards the finale and sort of the revelations, in terms of Regal, that revealing that he's Wily's son, and potentially keeping his disdain for the Hikari family for one reason or another, whether it's that he blames them for his father being absent and, like, just obsessed with stopping the lights, or the Hikaris in this case, or it could even be a matter of wanting to continue his father's legacy, or wanting to try to undermine that legacy by being like, he was always a failure, I could do this better, kind of shit. I'm not really partial to, like, one specific reason or another, but fact being, Regal kind of turns on everybody, with Laserman, And then, Lan is able to break past Laser Man. Regal escapes instead of, just falling off a building. And then miraculously coming back in the next game.
Which I guess Yuichiro would also have to be there too.
Right.
Because I actually, you know what, before we did start recording this, I actually mentioned this, and I just thought about this. I was thinking about like how we have the whole like the classic universe, or at least classic MegaMan, and like the whole thing of like, oh, it's Dr. Light and Dr. Wily, and then of course in this universe we still do have that. But I find it interesting because we have I forget what Dr. Light's exact name was in this. I'm pretty sure like his last name is still Hikari, but like his first name. But essentially, I'll just call him Dr. Light for the sake of it. Dr. Light, we don't really get to see him in the story really. He kind of comes up like later on, and like we still have like that rivalry, but like that classic rivalry between Dr. Light and Dr. Wily. Obviously, except that it's instead of robotics, it's Light creates like the internet and all that stuff. But I find it interesting because, with the early games, you have Yuichiro and Wily, but then here it's like, okay, we have Regal, who's the son of Wily, and it's like, why wasn't that just the thing from the get-go? Like, it's like this, like, sins of the father kind of thing, where it's like you have Yuichiro and Regal right off the bat, and maybe we actually can do the thing where it's like, oh, like at one point they were friends. Or even like in the first game, like some hypothetical thing, like starting off like they are friends and like something happens, and then like Regal then like towards the end could be like, man, like we really are like our fathers. Obviously Yuichiro's like, no, things could be different, we could do this, and obviously, and then Regal was like,
yeah, I think it's an interesting idea. I think for the sake of keeping things, I guess, within the second half of the trilogy, if we're to not alter too much previously, I think Regal being someone that like Dr. Hikari knows of, it's like, oh, he's a scientist from like another country, or something like that, or maybe I'm sure they crossed paths in the past, which is why he's viewed as trustworthy and all of that, something to that effect. I do think like the familial rivalry thing is like a little cheesy in my opinion, like to just have it be sort of for the sake of it. I do think, like you were getting at, like there needs to be some kind of inciting incident or some reason for Hikari and Regal to be butting heads. What's funny is at the end of the day, Hikari's son is the one who's going to be stopping him anyway. Just because Yuichiro isn't really like an operator in the traditional sense, except for in BN2, that like random optional post-game stuff. Where he has like copies of nabbies and shit for gameplay purposes mostly. But yeah, that would be something for y'all to kind of let us know in the comments as far as like what you think would make the most sense, or like what you would kind of prefer in terms of what Regal's exact motivation is. To me, it doesn't really matter that much what it is, but just that there is some sort of reason why he's doing what he's doing besides just, I'm evil and I'm going to be evil because...
yeah.
Evil's sake, right? And at the same time, though, I don't think that Regal necessarily needs to be like this deep, tragic character that we're supposed to feel bad for necessarily.
I don't
right?
think so either. It's still always nice to at least have like some layers.
Sure.
At least in this sense, anyway. Of course, I like keeping the through line with him being Wily's son. I still like that dichotomy because it's like I guess as far as the second half is concerned, where it's like Yuichiro does find out towards the end of this game. Obviously, he does find out, wait, oh, you're Wily's son, and then maybe he's like, oh, wait, and then he starts like thinking about stuff, and it's like, oh shit, things are kind of starting to wrap back around, or whatnot.
Right, and like, I do think I like the idea of Regal designing dark chips and wanting kind of this final piece of the puzzle from Duo. Which is, I know I kind of foreshadowed it earlier without, I think, directly saying it, but yeah, Regal knows that there's some kind of data that Duo contains that he needs to like perfect his dark chip formula or something. But I like the idea of Regal inventing dark chips and doing this kind of thing as a means to kind of do what Wily was trying to do, but more efficiently, I guess, and also like less, a little bit more from the shadows, as opposed to just being like, Wily with his grand plans and, making his presence super obvious and stuff like that. And kind of asking to be stopped in so many words, right? Like, kind of putting his, just being out in the spotlight and having the attention on him from the officials and the like. Whereas Regal is sort of, operating from the shadows, and when he thinks he's won in this game, he reveals himself, and we get all that kind of thing. But then once Laserman's defeated and he's forced to escape, that kind of messes with his plan. But then Lan and MegaMan, when they battle Duo to kind of, fend him off, right? MegaMan, slash Hub, unknowingly absorbs this data from Duo that Regal wants. And so then that kind of paints a target on MegaMan's back, leading into BN5 as to why Regal needs to corrupt MegaMan to his side, or try to delete him, or extract this data, or whatever.
Yeah, that is something that I think is really good that we can keep in there. And I also posed this idea earlier. This is an idea that I had in my mind for like a while now. I do like the idea of Duo being like an alien, something that's like kind of not completely separate from Battle Network. Like he's still a Navi, but like he's also like an actual like alien, like an alien net Navi of some sort. That does just like exist out there. That could kind of tie in a little bit to Star Force. Obviously, that we're not really going to get into that. That's just like a little cheeky, like some Marvel MCU crap, like established like later at some point or whatever. But I do like it does at least make sense, I think, in this context, especially because that is how it also goes in the anime, with Duo being more of like this kind of like this godlike entity out there, like this, this celestial alien out there that does exist, that he actually he comes to judge the planet and like whether it deems to be destroyed, and then he at least in the anime he does, I think he selects like 13 champions, which is obviously all of our known characters, to like test them and see if he deems the planet worthy or whatnot. Obviously they succeed. Very similar thing happens in the game, of course, originally, where they Mega Man and Lan, through their power and their cooperation and their unity, and seeing the unity between like not only just them, like all the all of the other characters that believe in them and those two, and like their like the power of friendship, of course, but that gets Duo to be like, okay, yeah, you got, I see you did your thing, and I'll be back like at some predetermined point, or whatever, to fucking test you again. Bye.
Yeah, and I think referencing as kind of being like this super far out foreshadow for Star Force stuff in terms of alien life and whatever, and in terms of alien life being very technological in that way, or like akin to technology that's found on Earth. I do want to point out that some people might notice like there are a lot of parallels to like Star Force 3's story in particular, with like the meteors incoming and the bad guy wants to harness the power of that meteor for whatever ulterior motive and whatever. But it's kind of like the fact of the matter is, I feel like Star Force 3's story is kind of like what if BN4's story was just better, just minus the tournament stuff. So it wasn't really like an intentional thing to make it so similar, but I think that a lot of these kinds of things just sort of make sense. And it sort of like, lines up these sorts of parallels between the two series, which is kind of nice. I don't think it's too redundant necessarily in this hypothetical, because, you do have the tournament component, and I mean, I guess the dark chips are not too unlike what Jack and Tia are up to in Star Force 3. So like, again, there's a lot of parallels, but it's more so just, I think the framework that just makes sense with Battle Network. And I wouldn't be surprised if part of SF3's, narrative design was thinking back on like, what are some ideas from our previous games, hence, the Battle Network games, that we could flesh out and kind of tell in a more compelling way.
Yeah, like I don't know if it's just me or not, but I mean, when I saw Andromeda, and I was just especially after doing my my Battle Network bosses tier list, and I was rating on like the boss designs, of course. I looked at Andromeda. I like Andromeda's design a lot, but then I looked at him in Duo, and I'm like, that's very similar to me. I don't know what it is. But when I looked at Andromeda, I'm like, I'm getting Duo vibes or something, and I just kind of spawned that idea from there.
Yeah, there's a lot of parallels for sure in terms of design, and it makes sense
Yeah.
because it's the same through line,
Of course, and I'm not even saying that's
sequel.
like intentional, like they meant to do that. I just think it's funny, like a little coincidental. But you know, it's not. I don't think it's like this major thing like that they planned it. I just think it kind of worked out that way.
No, yeah, no, I totally get what you're saying.
But yeah, that's pretty much like all of the major stuff. But it is to like leave off any like other like plot points, or I guess to cap off any like other stuff. Going back to the dark chips and like the negative effects, I still do like that maybe some navies are negatively affected and they are kind of like, not like dying, but they are kind of like, out of commission to the point where they can't be operated. So like that can carry over to the next game, or like Lan has to like, of course, aside from his determination to like find Regal and like, plan to bring him to justice and do all this other stuff, and also, of course, not to mention he'll also be targeted by Regal, so that's another thing. But then, like, just all, that little extra little sprinkle of, oh yeah, no, I gotta save all the other net navi, I gotta save these other net navis from like potentially dying from the effects of the dark chips, and of course, I mean, again, maybe we can throw a roll in there to, kind of, make the stakes a little more, more serious for Lan. I'm not, I don't know if we have to, but, that's just me.
But yeah, I can't really think of anything personally that I feel like we need to add. I feel like we touched kind of all the major bases in terms of like major plot
where do we leave Burnal? I said Burnal.
Burnal.
Where do we leave Barrel and Colonel? It's fun. I actually feel like we haven't talked enough about them. I feel like we do at least need to have a fight with them in the game, right?
I actually kind of don't think so. I kind of like I like the idea that like Barrel is just more of this side character that we're introducing him, in BN4, and that we kind of leave the mystery of what he's actually up to and like what Colonel's capable of and stuff like that. We just kind of save that for BN5.
Okay. Oh wait, okay. Well, kind of, how about this? Okay, so towards the end of the game, like we get Barrel talking, like he can we can get the drop for Colonel like at the end of the game. Like he's talking to Colonel, he can like, okay, yeah, it seems like our plans, or like we're going about the plan, or like our objective, like or rather like we're gonna reach our objective, and they're talking and stuff, and maybe like Colonel, like we get the name drop for Iris, or like maybe like Colonel's like yes, and then we can like find her or save her or do whatever. Maybe we don't even get the name drop for Iris. Maybe he's just like you get like the ambiguous thing in like anime or whatever, where it's like it's him, yes, it's him, or like or it's her, yes, it's her, like they, or that kind of stuff, or whatever stupid stuff.
Yeah, kind of like Metal Gear does this a lot, where you have like the sort of post credits codec call that sort of reveals some major information or whatever, and as kind of foreshadowing. And I think like, yes, keeping it to mostly foreshadowing I think is good, like keeping it ambiguous, right? Like maybe he's talking with someone about like I think that this Navi is like the key to what we're trying to accomplish, or something like that. Like I like Barrel, kind of hinting at Barrel also wanting that data that Mega Man absorbed from Duo, right? But for different means than Regal, obviously. But like he also sort of needs that data, needs that information to like do what he's trying to do with stuff that we'll tackle in later discussions.
We never mentioned that, but that can also be a plot point that comes up in 5.
Yeah, I kind of just thought of that in terms of like, why couldn't it just be the same data that Regal also wants, right? But we'll have to sort of sort out and figure out what the implications for that mean for the rewrite of BN5 story with all this context from this rewritten BN4.
So I guess Lane and Shad are like none the wiser, or does at least maybe Shad maybe like doesn't like pick up on Barrel, but maybe he starts feeling a little off, like by the end of the game or something.
You could even literally have Shad like confront Barrel and be like, you know, you were helpful, right? But I think they're like almost kind of like this seed of distrust where
Yeah, or maybe
Shaw
like,
is like,
or like maybe, you weren't around for like maybe he's like said certain thing despite like what you're telling us, like something going on or whatever.
yeah, I don't mind there being sort of this passive sort of confrontation between them of like, I don't know what you're up to, but you know, like you may have helped us this time, but I know you're like up to something, you know.
He's like, he was
Uh,
like, yeah, I trusted you, but I'm like, oh, I don't know, something's off about you or something like that.
right. Yeah, no,
That'll lead into
exactly.
5, because then obviously that's where the Team Proto Man, Team Colonel thing comes in, and I mean, yeah, I mean, it's the closest parallel in this universe we have to Zero fighting Colonel, so.
Right. And we'll save that discussion for the next video, I think.
All right. Well, if there is nothing else to go on about, then Cobra, go ahead and tell the people where they can find you.
Yeah, sure thing. I pretty much just had the YouTube channel. I mean, I literally do no social media or anything, but you can check me out at Cobra Codex. You know, I have some older Battle Network oriented content in terms of video uploads and discussions, but mostly a lot of streams. Like I streamed through the entire Legacy collection and pretty much all of the post game. Some of it I did off camera. Um, you know, I've talked about the Star Force games. I've streamed the Star Force games and the post game for the Legacy collections, for the Legacy collection for Star Force once that came out. In addition to, you know, some upcoming Mega Man oriented content. And also, my channel is also loaded with like a lot of other non Mega Man oriented content that, you know, still video games related, but, you know, just other video game franchises and series and one offs that I feel like I have something to say about over there.
And like I said, with the next part of this little like revision collab series, will be on his channel too. So definitely make sure you go check him out. Regardless, obviously, go watch his videos. His videos are great. I love watching this stuff. I love seeing him create. But yeah, just definitely come back to his channel for the BN5 revision, and getting to see all of that. And of course, as always, definitely subscribe to the channel. We are trying to get to 1,000 subs by the end of this year, so please, 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 if you enjoy what I do, if you like all these like cool little ideas, definitely go ahead and give me a shot. Make sure you hit the notification bell so that you never miss any updates for uploads and live streams coming up on the channel. Of course, make sure you like the video as well. Make sure you comment. I would definitely love to hear your guys' thoughts on like all these little ideas and stuff that we were talking about. I mean, how would you go about changing things? Do you have any like different ideas, or different ways you would go about it? Any things you would take out, please? I'd love to hear your opinions and stuff. And of course, make sure you are also keeping up with me on the community/post section of the channel for like all the updates and everything like that. I'm trying to make sure I get your input on like the videos and how they perform, or even just making sure that you guys are watching and all that stuff. And again, I appreciate you guys for coming around as always. And like I said, just giving this stuff a shot. But yeah, with all of that being said, this is the Space Cowboy, and I do hope you guys have a good night.